Yeah, good morning, everyone. From the organizer here in Mizoram University, I am Professor Lal Nundanga, Professor of Forestry Department, and I am now holding the office of Registrar in Mizoram University. Here with me, my friend, Dr. Lal Fakzuala. He is from Botany, Head of Department, and then Dr. Amit, who is from Zoology, with me here. And welcome all of you, especially to Professor Lindsay Brown.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon here, but yes.
Okay, yeah. I don't need to introduce much about Professor Lindsay Brown, and I welcome all the participants who have joined this webinar this morning, and welcome all of you. And Professor Lindsay Brown, we know that he is from University of Southern Queensland, Australia. Actually, he's the man of biomedical sciences and the School of Health and Well-being. He is from that Ipswich campus, and his field of research work is on this basic pharmacology as well as this nutrition pharmacology. And we have seen so many publications, I don't need to spell out all those points. So let us hear this Professor Lindsay. You are welcome this morning. Yeah, and the time is given to you, so you can start now. Welcome, Professor Lindsay Brown. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, especially Professor Sambasivarao and the other people on the committee. It's a pleasure to be involved in this series. Yes, my work is basically on nutritional disorders, but a lot of that has been on tropical foods, as we talked about last time. That has then brought us an interest in tropical diseases, because they will certainly affect the people that we're trying to work with functional food. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, why? Oh, that's right. Okay. Yes, we're from the USQ campus at Ipswich, which is about, as you see on the map there, about 30 minutes west of Brisbane. And it's an older campus. We've only had it for a few years, but it's a much older campus. It was at one stage a mental institution, and then it became a part of the University of Queensland, and then we took it over. One of the interesting things is the library area down the bottom there, which has some remarkable plants within the library. It makes it a very interesting place. The first thing I want to talk about, though, with the standard problems for tropical diseases is the incidence of substandard and counterfeit drugs. So as a broad problem in the area, part A on the left-hand side is the number of countries per category where poor quality antimicrobials have been reported. So 52 countries have reported poor quality beta-lactams, so the penicillins and cephalosporins. Down the bottom are the antiparasitic agents, so 29 countries reporting substandard chloroquine, 26 countries substandard artemisinin. And these are likely, therefore, not only to cause a lack of response, but possibly also the development of resistance. So that's an issue that we have to keep in mind the whole way through. The figure 2 on the right-hand side looks at the relative geographic distribution, the light and the dark on the bacterials or the antiparasitics, and we can see that Asia is by far the sets the record for the number of counterfeit and substandard drugs that are available. Another issue that will come up and will affect anything that we do on tropical diseases is the amount of healthcare spending. This was a paper from the Lancet last year, looking at past, present, and future of global health financing. So 2016 values shown there, And on the left-hand side, the health spending per capita. Tremendous variations around the world, from between 5 and 118 US dollars per year to greater than 2,406 US dollars. So that means that many of the tropical countries, especially in Africa, but also the Indian subcontinent, are spending less than about 100 US dollars per person on health, on all health expenditure. That doesn't leave much for preventive or treatment of long-term diseases. Some quick words on malaria. You people know, I assume, much more about the disease because it's much more local than it is for me. So those sort of signs, especially the fever, especially the muscular pain and the headache and the spleen enlargement for long term. 2 Nobel Prize winners early on. So from in 1907, Charles Laveran and Ronald Ross in 1902. Ronald Ross, as I'm sure you're well aware, did his work in Calcutta in a very small building that still exists there. And it was remarkable discoveries within that. Some of his notes are there. The Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta put out a number of these type of diagrams on the life cycles. So the sporogonic cycle, the exoerythrocytic cycle and the erythrocytic cycle. And I'm not going to go through those in detail, but I'm sure that you people can look those up. But also the key thing with that is that complexity actually is in a way a positive because it gives a lot of options, so a lot of targets to try and break those cycles and therefore decrease the disease state. To look at the cells, so the red blood cells in particular, looking at the different parasites in there. This is also from a Lancet article, looking on the differences between them. So falciparum, vivax, malariae, ovale, and a more unusual one, Knowlesii. Now, I'm not going to go through in details, but these are blood smears and therefore showing how to diagnose, and it is actually quite reasonable. The diagnosis in particular in places without tertiary hospital care. So where did Plasmodium come from? Well, this is an article in, I think it was last year actually, but looking at the out of Africa hypothesis, and in the middle there, the discovery, both falciparum and vivax evolved from parasites infecting wild living African apes. So falciparum relatively recently, probably 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, and vivax from a long line of parasites. The other interesting thing about this article is if you look at the authors and where they're working. In the list of authors, there are 3, 6, 8 authors. Possibly one is Indian, possibly, or at least Indian origin. But also the first two or the first couple of groups are working in Philadelphia, and the last one in Edinburgh. None of those are malarious countries. So this is not a local issue for these people. It then makes the question about why isn't this very interesting, very important work on malaria parasites being done in countries that are endemic for malaria? And of course, India is one of those. So how many people are affected? Well, these are numbers here, a number of things on this graph. So numbers of people affected, and on the left-hand side, the key there, the red ones are 10 to 20% of the population. And an area of the world that we'll mention in a number of slides, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So 145 people per 1,000 population are affected. So this is not a rare disease. This is very common. And in Africa in particular, much more than the rest of the world. There is still numbers in India, and because it may only be up to 1%, but 1% of a large population is still a lot of people. Burma much greater, and I think the Burmese border is remarkably close to where you're sitting, or many of you are sitting today. The deaths by malaria are certainly mostly in Africa. So if the graph in the middle down the bottom, malaria deaths by region. So Africa under 5 years as the greatest number of deaths of any group. But look what's happened after about 2005. The numbers have gone down. So that was to 2010. The numbers have kept going down even after that for a couple of years anyway. Current values are not available yet, but that's a remarkable change. So that decrease, and so it's worthwhile looking at what is the reason for that decrease. Yeah, is it better drugs? Not really. Is it better treatment? Probably not. There's one really simple reason, we'll come to it later. And here it is. If you don't get bitten by the parasite carrying mosquito, then you won't get the disease state. So a very simple advertisement: buy a net, save a life. And what does that mean in practice? Is it simply a nice marketing exercise, so these insecticide treated nets, or does it actually work? On the top there, the number of falciparum infections in children aged 2 to 10 across Africa, 2000 to 2015. Look at the numbers. So the red are 100%, the dark blue are 0. So especially in Democratic Republic of the Congo, in the center there, those numbers of children being infected was 100% or close to it. The change to 2015 is dramatic, not only there, but also in West Africa, so Ghana, for example, so really, and on the East Coast as well, so Mozambique, Tanzania, dramatically different. Look at the bottom one and see what correlates. So the proportion of the population sleeping under an insecticide-treated net in sub-Saharan Africa. So the green being 100%, the dark red being 0. So in 2005, almost no one. In 2010, Madagascar led the way, and Uganda as well. And then by 2013, there are pockets everywhere where almost 100% of those children, the children that are most at risk, are now sleeping under a net. That is a remarkable public health improvement. Another remarkable discovery that led to the Nobel Prize for UU2 was artemisinin. Coming from traditional Chinese medicine, the prescriptions there, which I can't read, but the prescriptions there from the third Han tomb was apparently from 168 BC, so before the Christian era, and has a description of how to use the Artemisia plants. And then the handbook from the 4th century, also showing apparently very clear instructions on how to use it. So these are not, and to use it for malaria. So these are not novel concepts. They were lost, but they've been found again, and that did lead to a Nobel Prize. So artemisinin as a complex structure there. Very interestingly, all those common compounds were introduced, probably artemisinin, but the other 3 were introduced because of the emergencies in war. So in particular, when soldiers from non-malarious areas, which means Europe, or at least Australia as well for chloroquine and mefloquine, but in areas that were non-malarious, went to war in the tropics. So quinine for the Spanish in South America, chloroquine for the US, Australian, and other troops in New Guinea and Indonesia, in World War II and mefloquine during the Vietnamese War. Artemisinin probably also certainly developed in a time when civil unrest was very marked. Are there newer malarials? The quinine was introduced in 1628. So that's getting close to 500 years. Must be one of the older compounds that we have available. There are some newer compounds coming in, and you can see those on the list there. There's a reference down below that will also give more information on those. One of the issues is that many of those are incredibly expensive. But also resistance may develop. We'll come back to the expense a little bit later. Resistance may also develop. So that dark brown coloring there is the third of the boxes, chloroquine resistant, but all are sensitive to the artemisinin-based combination therapy. So chloroquine resistant, most of the tropics, so South America, Africa, Yemen, India or the subcontinent, right through to Indonesia. And then in Indochina, some of those countries are in purple. Purple is chloroquine and all ACT sensitive. No, it's not. It's the country with artemisinin resistance, but no failure. And Myanmar, sorry, that's Myanmar. The other ones are the countries with failure of the artemisinin combinations. So global cases are certainly going down. They're not going down fast enough to see a reversion of the disease. So put the disease into history basket, but they're certainly coming down. Some numbers there also up to 2015 on number of deaths. Is there a vaccine? Well, yes, there's many vaccines. Do they work? That's a different question. The most tested one is this RTS-S vaccine. And the data suggests that it will decrease the, so the immunogenicity will certainly improve. So what we are seeing there is a decrease below the inflection point where we get infections, and about 30% of people are protected for up to 4 years after treatment. Now that's better than nothing, but there's still a long way to go before there's a very obviously effective vaccine, and then making that vaccine available to all people in the tropical areas that are in endemic areas has its own challenges. Another way of looking at the problem, which certainly surprised me when I first heard about it. So looking at the bacteria, so Wolbachia, which actually infects the Plasmodium, or infects the mosquitoes, sorry. And there is then no malaria transmission if there's high enough infection with that bacteria. So in those countries that are shown in Africa, there were native infections, and some of them may have been enough to actually decrease the infectivity of the mosquitoes. Can that be taken further? Well, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has spent significant amounts of money on it. And so it's certainly a possibility. Not yet a widespread option, but it's certainly a possibility. What I'd like to do is leave 2 questions, and this is the first one of them. Well, maybe 3. So leave some questions with people to think about at home, at work, wherever, and maybe even discuss it. The figure at the top shows the case incidence of malaria in Sri Lanka, then for most of that time called Ceylon, but now in Sri Lanka, which went to up to over 5 million infections in the early 1930s. came down to 0 in the early 1960s, but then went up again to 50 to 100,000. Good question. Why did it start? And if you look at the history, you'll see that that's the time when they decided to stop spraying for mosquitoes. And one of the reasons to stop the spraying was it was a civil war. If you're going to get shot at, people don't actually like spraying for mosquitoes. But then if you look at the second figure down below, the species distribution, it's mainly vivax, as much of Southeast Asia. But look at those numbers. From the year 2001 onwards, the numbers have come down dramatically. So that in 2012, there were 23 cases. I think only 6 of those were local cases, local transmission in the country of Sri Lanka. Now that's a dramatic change. And so what I would suggest is that everyone read that article. It's an open access article. Read that article to see some of the problems and how they can be overcome. It's really interesting. The second disease I want to look at is tuberculosis, the classic X-ray there, the classic look of a tuberculosis patient, clearly from India. The effects are shown in this slide. So the effects, the symptoms, so in particular, the lung, so the cough, and the structural abnormalities, the night sweats, but also in other organs in the body, the kidneys can be very markedly affected by the Mycobacterium tuberculate. How many cases are there? Well, look at the numbers there. So estimated new cases, all forms per 100,000 population per year. So the dark green ones, more than 300 per 100,000 populations. That's 3 per 1,000. And India, less numbers, but a much larger population. So a very large number of people in India. So most of those are tropical countries. You can pinpoint there the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and countries like Australia have very little tuberculosis, except in people coming to Australia. And so it is certainly tested for. 10.4 million cases in 2016, 1.67 million deaths, making tuberculosis the 9th leading cause of death and the highest of the infectious disorders. So how many people actually die and how has that changed? Well, the changes have been going down at several percent per year. If we could see at the top there, all TB cases in the incidence and the number of deaths. Sorry, the millions per year up there, and the TB deaths among the HIV negative. So there's still roughly a third of TB deaths are from HIV positive cases. And there's a good argument that TB only became considered as worthwhile researching when American men were dying of HIV with tuberculosis in especially New York and in San Francisco. And then there was suddenly money available to look at this, even though that's a very small proportion of the cases. You can see the changes. It's going the right direction. It's not going fast enough, but it is going in the right direction. Deaths occur throughout the ages. So figure 7 there, global distribution of incident cases. And so it's not restricted only to the young like malaria. It's across the whole spectrum of the population. New drugs for tuberculosis. There's a number of reports, I'm sure you can find them too, on different drugs, but there are 2 major issues, and that's illustrated with this compound, bedaquiline, is available in India, and it is the resistance was discovered to it the same year it was introduced. So very rapid development of resistance, but it's also costly. So from one of the internet sites, looking at the cost of these compounds in India, so in the italics there, so providing patients with drugs not available through the government system is not cheap. The dollar sign is US dollars, the rupees, I'm sure you understand much better. But for a 6-month trial, which is necessary, 27,000 rupees for one and 1.4 lakh for the other drug. Imipenem is normally used together, and that's another 10.8 lakh. And then on top of that, there's courier charges to get the drugs to the patient. Now, that drug may be wonderful, but those costs means that most of the population with tuberculosis simply do not have access. History of pandemics. Well, we're in the middle of one. And down the bottom is, you'll show that that's obviously an old figure. The novel coronavirus, COVID-19, 7.9 thousand. Well, clearly that was in March, mid-March, and it's now much greater than that. India on its own has well and truly surpassed that number. But we're still a long way, even if we're at the roughly 500,000 deaths now. We're still at a long way from the others. The Hong Kong flu, just above it, killed 1 million, as did the Asian flu in the 50s and 60s. We're only just half of that with coronavirus. But look with things like HIV AIDS, but the Spanish flu, 40 to 50 million. But then looking back at other ones like the plague. So look up at the top, the first plague, the plague of Justinian, numbers are argued. The Black Death, the bubonic plague in Europe in the mid-1300s, but also the Great Plagues in London in 1665, I think it was, but also throughout Europe, and then a third plague. We'll come back to those. So these are numbers that are simply amazing. And remember, those numbers were at lower world populations. So if we look at the plague, because that can teach us a lot, the bubonic plague, the pneumonic plague, depending on where the symptoms are. The symptoms come quickly and patients can die within days. So it's a bacteria, Yersinia pestis, discovered by a researcher from the Pasteur Institute in Paris, working in Hong Kong in the 1890s. And but it's been around for a lot longer than that. Some of the first signs from the genome analysis puts the dating at before 4,200 years before the present. So something at 2,000 years or more before the Christian era, where there was a movement from Central Asia into what is now Russia and Poland, but also into what is now Western Europe, as you can see from there, and then a movement back towards the Central Asia, maybe also to China in that time. So this follows by the molecular studies on those, with the question, is that when it became virulent? So did it change during that time to increase the virulence and therefore kill people? But the three great plagues that are known, the first, second, and third pandemic, the first pandemic coming from Central Asia, maybe from China, maybe just Central Asia, on the Silk Route, and then into Europe. So this is the so-called plague of Justinian, and there's now intense argument about how lethal that was. Wikipedia will tell you the opinion of most people is around the 20 to 50 million, but there are some more recent papers that have looked at the books that were written at that time and have suggested that maybe that is vastly overblown. And so, to use a more modern term, it was fake news. So fake news because one of the historian that is relied on, Procopius, simply didn't like Emperor Justinian and was trying to bring him down. The second plague, so that coming back into from that heartland and then coming through again the trade routes in the 1300s throughout Europe. And then the third one going from Hong Kong from 1894 onwards. And that one is really interesting. Well, they're all interesting, but this one is really interesting. So this is on ships, and so went much more rapidly. In the bubonic plague in Europe, it took 5 years or 6 years for the whole of Europe to become infected. This went around the world on rats on ships and went within, as you can see there, within a very short period of time from Hong Kong. It even got to Brisbane. And so I checked that out, and there were something over 200 people, almost 300 people died in 1899, and then a second outbreak in 1921 of the plague. Just to put that into perspective, we had a population of 2 or 3 million at that stage. We now have a population of 25 million, and only 110 people have died of coronavirus so far. We hope it stays that low. But in particular, one of the areas, or two areas, one is Madagascar, and the second one, North America. So the native animals in those areas were apparently had no plague, so no Yersinia pestis. It then became endemic in the native wildlife in the mountainous areas of Madagascar and also in the Midwest of the US, where it is still endemic in wildlife. But what does that mean? Well, let's look at Madagascar. Madagascar has had a range of infections. So the middle figure is of about the last 20 years from before 2017, showing that there were cases every year up to about 750, always in that Central Highlands area. So that's the area that became endemic after it escaped on rats at the port, got into those local wildlife populations more than 100 years ago, and has stayed there. But there was a major outbreak in 2017. And so the dates after the 1st of August 2017, pneumonic and bubonic plague, and those numbers are incidents of 60 per day. So much higher and more deaths from that. So that is a consequence of that third pandemic still going on 120 years later. Does the plague exist in India? Yes, of course it does. And I'm sure you've all seen reports on that. In Himachal Pradesh, for example, again, from the local people skinning native animals and then having the bacteria transmitted to them from the fleas and therefore development of plague. But those are countries around the world that still have outbreaks. In 2017 in Madagascar, in the 21st century in 7 countries there, and then also that have the plague as an animal disease. So it's still around. This is not some ancient history. This is actually present. We don't have a vaccine that is widely available. So here's the second question I'd like people to think about when they're at home. And that is that the bacteria, Yersinia pestis, is a potential agent of bioterrorism. So dropping that onto sensitive populations could lead to the human plague and vast numbers of deaths. So 2 questions there. How could populations in tropical countries be protected? And there is a article that's open access that you should be able to read easily, and talking about oral vaccination. So is it possible? It's potential. Is it likely to be useful? Something that's worth reading. Could we even repurpose existing drugs so that we don't have to go through the $1 billion or two to bring a new drug onto the market? Possibly. And there's some possibilities in that article as well. So something worth looking at. If we go on to worms, and these are patients clearly with lymphatic filariasis. So patients where the microfilaria, so a very thin, long worm, gets into the body and blocks lymph nodes, and therefore causing the fluid-filled legs, and in the gentleman's case, testes. Surgery on those is remarkably difficult and probably life-threatening. But those are certainly severe cases, and hopefully that very rarely happens. But the aim is to eliminate lymphatic filariasis by 2020. I want to give a case study. A case study that was published 2017 by colleagues at an Australian university, so James Cook University at their Cairns campus in far north Queensland, certainly tropical area. So looking at the 2000 and 2017 maps, so the red being where there are outbreaks of, or where there is a lymphatic filariasis. And what you can see in those, that Bangladesh was a marked issue. 2017, mostly gone. India, in the northeast states, so Assam still with a problem, not much change. Myanmar, improvements, but still a long way to go. But look at the border areas of Myanmar and Thailand. 2000 significant cases, right down to the border with Malaysia. 2017, they're all green. The cases in Cambodia and the south of Laos have also been markedly reduced. Cases in Malaysia almost unchanged. So what happened? How did they do it? Well, the title there says pre-MDA, mass drug administration. And so on the left is lymphatic filariasis, on the right onchocerciasis or river blindness, similar problems, also microfilaria. But the WHO set up the global program to eliminate lymphatic filariasis, and so used an acronym. So a number of things in the diagram there. Firstly, mass drug administration. I'll talk about that on the next slide as well. But then also relieving the suffering of people who are affected as a really important issue. So post mass drug administration surveillance, but also later on, keep following it, especially in the animals in the area, to make sure that that as a host reservoir is also eliminated. So that VC-IVM is vector control and integrated vector management. And that is part of the whole process to do all of that. Does it work? Well, it did in Thailand and it has in other countries. So there are a number of countries that are now free. So why this mass drug administration? Well, it's a very simple concept to treat everybody in the community at basically the same time. So at least once a year, so treat them once a year, so that there is a filaria-free, a microfilaria-free situation at least every year. And to do that for at least 5 years, which is considered as the reproductive lifespan of an adult worm in an infected human. The mass drug administration is normally either ivermectin or plus albendazole or diethylcarbamazide plus albendazole. There are now some trials with all three drugs, which seem to be as beneficial or even better. So that treatment is given to the community. So for example, either through the community effects or through the schools, for example, by each school child being asked how many people live at your place, how old are they, here are the drugs for everyone to take tonight. That relies on compliance. So compliance, the accepted compliance is 65%. If it's greater than 65%, then there's likely to be the elimination of the filaria. Less than 65%, it won't occur. The numbers in Thailand, in most of the areas, were well above that 65%, sometimes up to 90, 95%. The numbers in Bangladesh were that. However, the numbers in Assam in particular, for many of the communities, were around the 45 to 50%. So that is the reason why the numbers in Assam in particular haven't gone down the same way as the rest. So this requires a very important drive to make the community aware of the issue, and also for them to take the tablets. How Thailand eliminated lymphatic filariasis as a public health problem. So I'll let you read through this at some stage, but the timeline is really interesting. This is not something that happens overnight. This takes years of exercise to do it, surveying the country, implementing the mass drug administration to interrupt transmission, establish a robust morbidity management and disability prevention program, and then also control lymphatic filariasis infection in animals. And then, so there's the objectives, you can see the strategies and the timeline. But it worked. It worked in Thailand. It has worked in other countries as well. Could it work in India? Of course it could work in India, but that's something that's beyond my control. One of those drugs was ivermectin. Ivermectin, a reflection on simplicity. Now, looking at that structure there, that's not a simple structure. But that compound was isolated by Satoshi Omura, and he shared the Nobel Prize with William Campbell in 2015 for that. And Dr. Campbell is the man standing up there talking to other experts at the announcement that Merck would donate ivermectin for the prevention of river blindness, and they have. Now, the cost per tablet is relatively small. Down the bottom, the cost of roughly 50 rupees for 50 tablets, and at 1 to 2 tablets every 3 to 12 months, depending on the area, then that's not a large cost. It's certainly a large cost if a government spends $5 a year per person, $5 US per year, but it should still be possible to do that. And reversing the worm infections improves economic activity, improves life expectancy, and so the cost effectiveness is enormous. Onchocerciasis, river blindness. The Carter Center, so Jimmy Carter, the former US president, set up this Carter Center. It's well worth looking at their website. Fascinating. And they have worked on river blindness and basically eliminated it in a number of countries. So this gentleman's story is on that website. He was the major economically active person, so the farmer for his family. Near the rivers, it's called river blindness because the worm lives near water and in the good soil next to the river. And he was infected, like many others, went blind, and therefore cannot feed his family. The other picture there is a very simple concept. How do you dose these? Well, trying to measure body weight in each person is difficult. So in this case, what happened was that these people, clearly in Central Africa, developed a scheme where they used the height as a surrogate measurement for body weight and looked at the height and said whether they needed 1, 2, 3, or 4 tablets of the medication available. Simple, straightforward, and it works. River blindness means the microfilariae are injected by a fly. They reproduce, they proliferate, they cause infection, and that infection in the eye causing severe lesions and blindness, also skin lesions. The Carter Foundation working in the areas in the top slide. So how is it going to eliminate? Well, the idea was to eliminate by 2020. That won't happen. So this is the eradication program. So getting rid of the microfilaria. Getting rid of the disease state will take about 20 years longer. So some countries, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, have certainly, and Mali, have certainly eradicated. But the one in the middle is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is looking at 2037 for eradication. And it is beaten by South Sudan. South Sudan looking at 2040 for eradication. And then another 10, 15, maybe even 20 years for elimination of the problems. That's a long time. A lot of things can happen in the next 20 or 30 years. Hopefully, they will keep moving towards that. But how can that happen? Well, this is the other graph there on the eradication. The number of projects, which means how many areas are being treated with community drug treatment with ivermectin, CDTI. But look at the numbers there, the cumulative number of treatments that will be needed, about 1.3 billion to reverse that onchocercitis, that river blindness. Is it worth doing? Of course it's worth doing for the people that are involved, but also for the countries and for the economic advantage. And that's a really important issue. The last, I think, of the worms I want to talk about, the guinea worm has been effectively eliminated, not by drugs, not by vaccines, but by preventing infection. It is in the pond water lying on the ground, and the young boy in the center one is using a filter to drink water. If you don't get infected, you don't get the worm coming out, as in the top one, a female worm coming out to lay eggs. Has there been success? Dramatic success. The grey countries are those that were infected in 1986, including India. That was about 1990 that India and or early 1990s that India and Pakistan became free. Also, many of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. There's only 4 countries left, and let's look at the numbers. So in the year 2000, there were 892,000 and a few infections. In 2016, there were 25. In the number of localities infected, there were 9,522 in 2004, I think it is, 2006. By 2016, that had gone down to 19. And those are basically in a few in Ethiopia, the map down below, some in South Sudan, and some in Chad. What's the relationship? Well, 2015, the species was reported to be near eradication, except in those 4 countries. Those 4 countries are all affected by civil wars, which very politely affects the safety of health workers. If there are no health workers there, there's no control. But really interestingly, that worm is now on the critically endangered conservation list. And I think that's a good move. So guinea worm disease is set to become the second human disease after smallpox to be eradicated without the use of a vaccine or a medicine. Again, look at the Carter Center for some really interesting information. Worms like the roundworm are everywhere around the world. When they are treated, they will be expelled, and that young boy has a fairly obvious worm infection. The treatment is cheap, parenteral, and it's available. These are the dose units in Australia. They're available and easily treated, orally active. But now to something which is much more dangerous. So the Ebola virus. So looking at some viruses, a couple of slides on viruses. So the Ebola virus across Central Africa, including the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the sites where they've been found. And remember, viruses are going to have increased problems because they will reproduce inside cells. And that reproduction, or that mode of reproduction using the host cell's machinery, means that they're going to be much harder, like all viruses, much harder to treat without killing the host cell. The pretty pictures of the cycles. So the pre-outbreak reservoir hosts in bats, intermediate hosts in animals like that. The chimpanzee and the gorilla, and the other one, not sure how it's pronounced, but the other one is a local antelope in Central Africa. Human-to-human transmission, and the issues of surveillance, education, vaccination, but it rapidly causes deaths, so therefore safe burial is really important. There are a lot of psychological issues about people not being game to tell people they're infected, and so coming for treatment too late. The outbreak can be brought under control, or has been brought under control, but at enormous cost to life. The major drugs that may help: antiemetics, antibiotic, anti-malarial agents, psychological support, not a drug, analgesic agents, rehydration. So what's missing there? There's no vaccine, there's no selective antiviral compound. Are these epidemics common? Well, here's one that's still going. So these are numbers up till the 6th of February this year at different areas within the east part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, relatively close to the Uganda border. And you can see the number of cases there per day. So 100 cases in total per day for quite a period of time. So between 75 and 100, between quite a period of time in in April to August last year, but still continuing. So this is an active problem. Is a vaccine possible? Yes, it's possible, but it doesn't exist yet. There is there are a number being developed, and this is one of those where a part of a vesicular stomatitis virus is used, part of the GP program, a protein from the Ebola virus inserted in that. And this then contains a modified VSV and no other molecule belonging to Ebola. And this should lead to the production of antibodies that neutralize the Ebola virus and therefore ensuring protection. Great concept, but how do you get a virus to African countries, to the equatorial countries? Can it be made at a price that is affordable for the people there or for their government? And is it effective? We still have a long way to go to know that for sure. Now, 2017 article in there, New England Journal of Medicine, which should also be available to everyone, talking about that, so you can work out more from there. Another virus, the Zika virus. The Zika virus outbreak in particular in Brazil in 2016 got world headlines. It didn't actually just happen like that. The first outbreaks were in 2007 in the Pacific, some of the Pacific countries in YAP, but it had been known as endemic in Africa and in Eastern Asia for a long time. First discovered in 1947 in a transmission case from the Zika forest in Uganda, hence the name. So the transmission cycle in those forest animals, as you can see at the top, through mosquitoes, and then down the bottom into humans, and then into suburban and urban transmission cycle. The major and very disastrous effect is on newborns, so mothers infected during pregnancy, and that's a microcephaly, a decrease in the size of the head. Some of those will remain asymptomatic, but there's a whole list of effects. So blindness in the middle there, blindness, hearing loss, and you can keep reading those, severe neurodevelopmental delays are the long-term outlook for the children who were severely affected during pregnancy. Now that is going to therefore be an issue for the lifetime of those children. So that's a long-term issue for any country. The dengue virus, last slide, the dengue virus. It's widespread, it causes severe pain, but there's actually no vaccine or selective treatment that is widely available. There are many vaccines, but they have been shown to have limited effectiveness. And in countries like Vietnam through to Myanmar, these are major issues. Some of my colleagues at the Queensland University of Technology have been working on that for 20 or 30 years and have got some very interesting compounds, but no widely available vaccine and no antiviral treatment. So I would like to leave this one as the last slide, to leave this problem with you. For people who are listening in, sitting at home, sitting in their office, wherever, to think about how can this problem be overcome. 2 papers there, one from The Lancet, one from Acta Tropica, which may be a little bit harder to get, looking at this issue, because this issue also applies to other insect-borne viruses, arboviruses, and the one down there that you would know in India, chikungunya, and how then to treat that. So these are tropical viruses. These are part of the group of tropical diseases that are important in the tropical areas, obviously. And we have some successes. The river blindness is a dramatic success, and we have some pretty impressive failures. Ebola is at the moment a very impressive failure. Dengue virus is also a very important failure, and chikungunya as well. So there is a lot to be done, and but we need the information first, and we need to know what the issues are. So right back at the start, the money involved in healthcare, but also the substandard drugs, and there's a whole other range of issues, as in the some of the religious issues around that tropics area, but these are stories for another day. So until then, thank you very much, and I'm certainly happy to answer any of the questions with Dr. Amit there. So thank you very much for your attention. You're muted.
Hello. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you, Professor Brown, for having such an informative lecture. And as I can see, most of the participants really liked your lecture. So, and I request all the participants to post their question in QA box. Sir, meanwhile, we are having some questions. So if you can take them.
certainly.
Yeah. So do you want me to read it or you can take it from Q&A session?
I'll let you read it because then everyone can hear it.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question is there any relation among malaria, sickle cell anemia, AIDS, and tuberculosis?
Yes, not in the infective agents, but this is determined as the four great diseases. And so especially in sub-Saharan Africa, so again, Democratic Republic of Congo, many people will be infected with all of those. And was sleeping sickness one of those? Trypanosoma?
So sickle cell anemia, AIDS, and tuberculosis.
Sickle cell anemia is a genetic issue, so probably nothing to do with this, but all of the others are infections. But the other one that goes in there instead of sickle cell anemia is trypanosomiasis, so sleeping sickness. And so this becomes a really ethical question. When patients have one of these or more than one, which one do you treat first? Because all of them will kill them.
Yeah. So another question is why there is no vaccine for common cold, rhinovirus, and some other protozoan diseases like malaria, dengue.
Okay, let's be political. The tropical diseases occur in the tropical countries. The money for developing new drugs, so the $1 to $2 billion that's needed, is available in Western Europe, Japan, USA and Canada, and that's about it, none of which are tropical countries. So these are politely known as neglected diseases. So drug companies cannot make a profit by developing drugs for many tropical diseases. So there is no interest. And that's a really, that's an important issue. That's easy to say for me sitting in comfortable Australia, by the way. There is a vaccine for influenza and millions of that are used around the world. I mean, I get that every year, but no vaccines for these really important diseases that kill 1 million people or more each year. And that's a failing of the system. As humans, we have failed our fellow humans in not developing those.
So another question is that what is the main problem in developing vaccine for malaria diseases?
The main problem is developing a vaccine that is adequate for the major types of malaria, for all of them and not simply one of them, and one that retains the results. So the figures I showed you, probably the best one, the best vaccine, after 4 years, only 30% are still protected. We want 100% being protected, not 30%. And the second issue is that most deaths occur in children aged under 5. So this has to be then a vaccine that is given at birth, and it has to work for that period of time.
Thank you, sir. Another question is, India often use artemisinin-based combination therapy for treatment of malaria. How effective is it?
Very. It's still remarkably effective. Will resistance develop? Probably. There is certainly resistance, has been shown in some of the Indochina countries, so Thailand in particular, but also I think Cambodia as well. Resistance will develop. So in the end, that will treat existing malaria, but the aim must be to stop the transmission. And stopping the transmission means something like buying a net, an insecticide treated net. and using that so that you don't get bitten. When we travel to, in the past, not now, but when we traveled to Papua New Guinea, the advice was do not go outside in the early morning or the late afternoon, because that's when the mosquitoes are active and therefore you are likely to get bitten. So the interruption of transmission is really important. And that was the big success in Sri Lanka in the early 60s. But treating the disease after it's occurred is closing the gate after the horse has bolted.
Yes, thank you, sir. Another question is it possible for Plasmodium to revert from resistant stage to susceptible stage against anti-malarial drugs such as chloroquine or artemisinin?
That's a very good question, and I don't actually know the answer to that one. I don't remember ever seeing any evidence for that. So yeah, the question I think is, if we stopped chloroquine for say 20 years, would resistance stop and sensitivity occur again? Don't know. Don't know if that's ever been tried. Don't know if it would work, but it's certainly a very interesting question.
Thank you, sir. Another question is that what do you think to develop a live vector vaccine against malaria, or the epidemiological importance of transmission blocking vaccine?
Very important. But this is an issue that that academics will sit down around the coffee table and talk about. Bringing it into practice is a major problem. So developing any vaccine. So there's been enormous amounts spent on the vaccines and it's in one of those papers that I linked there, the enormous amounts of money being spent, and we don't have one yet.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. One of the participants is interested to know if any new anti-TB drug has been released in 2020.
Any new
tuberculosis drug has been released in 2020.
There are some that are close to being released, and certainly there is a paper which I may not have put on the slide looking at some of those drugs. The big problem for those is the cost. So the cost that is that is needed for long-term treatment is enormous. And that's the issue. Yes, there are some becoming available, but ones that become available and are realistic in price is almost a contradiction.
Okay, sir. Next question is that in the treatment of filariasis, is it worth to target Wolbachia?
We don't know. It's certainly very worthwhile in malaria. We don't know whether that would also affect the other mosquito-borne diseases. I haven't seen anything on that. That doesn't mean there isn't something. There may be something in the literature. The literature is enormous. But that's certainly, that was very much thinking outside the box to develop a way of treatment. Does it work for other mosquito-borne diseases? We simply don't know. Should we try it? Of course we should. Clinical trials are also not cheap, but it's certainly worth looking at.
Next question is there any adverse effects of complete vaccination from birth to 12-year-old children as per standard immunization chart?
No, I'm a pharmacologist by training. No drug has no side effects. Nothing has no side effects. Water given in large quantities will have side effects. So there will be a very low proportion of adverse effects in any medication. Is that it's very low? I was having a discussion yesterday on chickenpox virus in Australia. The numbers have gone down something like 90%, and there is still approximately 1 death per 25 million people per year of chickenpox in Australia. Now, for that one person, that's a disaster. And for their family, that's a disaster. But that's a very small number in the whole population. So what stage do you accept the risk for the benefit of the vast majority? I can't answer that question. That's an ethics question.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Another question is why virus infection and its evolution is high in temperate areas?
Virus infection is high everywhere. It depends on the virus. I think the person is probably suggesting cities like Wuhan, which are sort of become famous for viruses. And that's certainly not a tropical area. It's a more temperate area. But the viruses will live in both tropical and subtropical areas and temperate areas, and have become very successful in reproducing.
The next question is there any vaccine for Zika virus?
No, not as far as I'm aware. And certainly I think I looked up until about, so in papers published up about the middle of last year, and didn't see anything in 2020. No, there isn't a virus. It's relatively few people are infected, but in that group that are women of reproductive age, it's obviously can be disastrous. But as far as I'm aware, no, there is no virus for that. No vaccine, sorry, for that virus.
So one participant is interested to know your views regarding the coronavirus.
How long have we got to answer the question? The coronavirus is a severe virus. It's very infectious. Yes, there are relatively few people that are dying compared with the number that are infected, but those numbers altogether now are enormous, and it is basically the aging population, relatively unusual in children and young adults, but certainly in people with other disease, comorbidity. And this is, yes, a major medical emergency in many countries. And I think the numbers that we're seeing are evidence of that. And the numbers, despite a lockdown in India, the numbers are now going dramatically higher on a daily basis. And they're probably vastly underestimated anyway, because I doubt whether many of the majority of people who live in the small villages in India are being tested. So those numbers are simply absolutely amazing. What it's doing to the economy, that's something I'll leave to an economist to talk about.
Okay, so in relation to this, I would like to know how much HCQ, this hydroxychloroquine, can play the role, because a lot of debate is going on about the use of this particular medicine, which is in some part is used as a anti-malarial drugs, but in India primarily is used as a treatment for the arthritis.
Exactly. So this is the concept of repurposing drugs for other uses. So it was never intended to be an anti-arthritis drug, but it works. Does it work in coronavirus? Pick your choice of answers. And the answers will be from extremely negative to extremely positive. So pick which one ever suits your opinion, and you'll find something there. It's too early to make a logical answer to that. It's too early because the trials have simply not been done. Dexamethasone may improve survival in patients in an ICU. We need drugs that prevent patients getting into an ICU with coronavirus. But with hydroxychloroquine, lots of words, remarkably little information.
Okay, thank you, sir. Another question is that, as you said, that there is no vaccine for dengue and Ebola viruses, but
Well, there's no widely available effective vaccine.
yeah, but can you tell us what are the preventive measures specifically of these two viruses?
Don't get bitten.
Wha-
That's the very simple one. Don't get bitten by the insect that carries it. Or the other way is to stay in countries that don't have the virus. Now, Australia does. Dengue virus is unusual here, but it does occur in the tropical regions and even down to Brisbane. So this requires public health measures when we don't have a vaccine and we don't have drugs.
Thank you, sir. I think next question is difficult to answer because the participant is asking, what is the origin of COVID-19? Is it man-made or naturally evolved?
We don't know the answer to that. You're quite right. It's a difficult question. My own opinion is it certainly is not man-made. That is, I think the belief in making that and that was man-made sounds like science fiction. I don't think we have the skills to do that and therefore to let it loose. To me, a much more logical concept is that it was one of the bat caves of southern China. People infected a number of years ago, and then and it got out into the general public. That seems to be the closest relative to COVID-19. Now, was anyone at fault? Well, the WHO can have the political part of that. I see that a former New Zealand Prime Minister, Helen Clark, is leading up the team to look at that. And I think it's former Peru president or prime minister. Good luck to them.
Thank you. Another question is related to COVID-19, and the participant is asking how safe and effective is plasma therapy in COVID-19?
I don't know the answer to that, and I would be cynical, but I don't know the answer.
Okay, sir. Next question is, what are the main symptoms of river blindness at the initial stage?
The main symptoms are that you feel that you've been bitten, so a sharp bite, and then maybe for years, nothing really happens. And then the eyesight starts going, starts getting worse. And when it's looked at, then it's seen. So that initial stage, most people apparently do not recognize that they have been bitten by the parasite and the parasite injected. It's simply another insect bite.
Okay, thank you, sir. Another question is there a permanent cure for filariasis?
There is. So treatment of that whole program there that I gave for Thailand, and also for other countries where there has been that strategy worked out of map it where it's first, and then treat the humans, and then treat the disease states, and then get rid of the vector hosts in animals. That's treatment. That's a permanent treatment. That's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in 1 or 2 years. As you saw with those numbers, that took 17 years or 15 years, I've forgotten now, 15 or 17 years in Thailand to bring that under control. This is a public health matter, and this is something that relies on experts and relies on the community taking part in it completely.
Thank you, sir. So again, the participants are very much interested to know about the coronavirus. So the next question is, how can we differentiate between the major symptoms of common cold and coronavirus?
By the testing on the molecular testing to see which one is there. The symptoms are there are some differences in symptoms. So cough, for example. But the only way of really testing is the nasal swab and then the testing for that.
Another question is there any vaccine possible for COVID-19 in recent time?
Is there any
Vaccine possible for recent time?
The vaccines are being developed. There's something like 90 of them apparently being developed around the world, so 90. Will any of those work? That's a long time until we know. So there is some rapid testing going on. I think every country has produced one or two. And there's rapid testing going on. I'm not sure what the results will be. There's certainly a lot of pressure to find a vaccine. So there's a lot of issues there, ethical issues in trying to rush that development. We still don't have a vaccine for the common cold, as someone mentioned earlier. We don't have a vaccine that gives multi-year immunity for influenza, because we develop a new one each year, basically. So saying that we're going to have a COVID-19 virus rapidly may be optimistic. The previous SARS, also virus, the SARS epidemic 2004, I think it was, 2005, something like that. We still don't have a vaccine for that.
So the next question is also related with the vaccine. So participant is asking, if at all a vaccine comes up for COVID, how effective it will be as the virus is mutating continuously?
That's a very good question, and that's exactly what happens with the influenza vaccine, and that's why it has to be changed each year. And it's, again, coronavirus, and it's likely to be the same. Do we know that for sure? No, we don't. That's something we may learn in the next couple of years, but we don't know it now.
So next question is, can it be said that awareness regarding personal hygiene based on local parasites can help reduce the occurrence of much of the diseases?
Yes. If you don't get bitten by the mosquito or bitten by the insect, or you're not close to someone who has an airborne virus, then you're not going to get it.
Okay, next question is related to you, probably. The participant is asking, if you want to make a vaccine, which disease would be?
This would depend on who's paying. And if someone's willing to pay $1 billion or two, I'd work on whatever they want me to work on.
So another question.
One or two more questions.
Okay, thank you. So next question is it possible that coronavirus can eradicate without vaccine?
Unlikely. We can decrease transmission. Can we ever truly eradicate it? Probably not. So this may be something that we wait until it becomes less virulent with different mutations, and then simply live with it, at least at a low level. How much do we accept some fatalities, especially in the older population? Again, an ethics issue.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think I will take this as a last question because I feel it is very relevant. Is there any relationship between climate change and pathogenicity of pathogens?
Yes. If we're looking at tropical viruses, tropical diseases, and the temperature is increasing, this would suggest there's going to be larger areas of the world that are effectively tropical. And if those diseases have become well established in the current tropical areas, there is no reason at all why they won't become established in these new tropical areas.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, sir. Still, there are many questions, but it's difficult to take all the questions.
Well, if there are more questions that you think are really worthwhile answering, please put them onto a file and send me as a Word file, and I'll
Okay.
try and get to that then.
Okay, okay, thank you, sir. So with this, we have come to the end of this webinar. And as a organizing committee side, I would like to thank for the first to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Kiara Sambasiva Rao, to initiate this webinar program. And during the lockdown, although now we are not in exactly in the lockdown phase, but still our university is continuing this program, and approximately more than 80 webinars we have organized so far, and many more are in pipeline. So thank you, Professor Kiara Sambasiva Rao, for initiating this program. I would like to thank our speaker, Professor Lindsay Brown, who delivered an excellent talk, and most of the participants are liking, even they are asking for your slides. I don't know how much it is possible to give your lecture as a PPT to them, but still, it's really an excellent talk. We all enjoyed it. I would also like to thank all the participants who enthusiastically participated and asked several questions. Some of their questions which we couldn't answer due to lack of time, we'll try to post it through the Word file. And I would like to thank the other two organizing committee members who unfortunately went to participate in another administrative meeting. That's why they are not here. But on behalf of them, I would like to thank to all of you, and especially to our ICT members and all and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and also especially to the organizing committee, but also to Professor Sambasiva Rao for all of you making this possible.
Yeah, he's with us, but he's
muted.
He's on mute, yeah.
So having a vice chancellor muted is an unusual situation, isn't it?
His microphone is mute from his side. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Brown.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. I will be in touch.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Look forward to it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you all. Now we are ending this meeting.